Well, turning overseas, the International Criminal Court has issued arrest warrants for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, his former defense minister, and Hamas officials. The warrants turn Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant into internationally wanted suspects. CBN's Chris Mitchell reports.
The warrants accuse Netanyahu and Gallant of war crimes and crimes against humanity over the war in Gaza, and Hamas for the October 7th attacks that triggered Israel's offensive. The ICC decision would put Netanyahu and Gallant at risk of arrest if they traveled to certain countries. Back in May, when the ICC threatened arrest warrants, Netanyahu called it a moral outrage of historic proportions. The warrants come as Israel fights wars on its southern border with Hamas and Hezbollah in Lebanon. On Wednesday, U.S. negotiator Amos Hochstein concluded talks with Lebanon's Speaker of the Parliament.
If we made progress, I would go to Israel and make those additional discussions there based on the conversations here and see what we can do.
A major sticking point is Hezbollah's demand that Israel can't respond to violations by the terror group.
It is not allowed for Israel to violate and kill and enter whenever it wants.
Israel's new foreign minister says they must have that right.
We will need to keep the freedom of to act if there will be violations.
Zahar says Israel must be able to keep Hezbollah from ever again becoming a huge threat.
We will have to enforce that they won't be able to build again their force in Lebanon. They won't be able to bring again ammunition, missiles.
While Hochstein would not discuss details of the agreement, Middle East analyst Lee Smith tells CBN News it would underwrite the Lebanese army that's been infiltrated by Hezbollah.
We're talking about an additional $400 million for the Lebanese armed forces, in addition to the hundreds of millions that we have now decided to give them yearly. What we're doing is we're paying a Hezbollah asset.
Smith says the deal favors Hezbollah.
It not only protects an Iranian proxy, the chief Iranian proxy, Hezbollah, what it also does is it also it stiffs the American taxpayer. We call it funding for Lebanon. It's not funding for Lebanon. It's funding for Hezbollah.
At the UN Wednesday, the U.S. vetoed a Security Council resolution demanding an immediate, unconditional, and permanent ceasefire in Gaza.
We made clear throughout negotiations we could not support an unconditional ceasefire that failed to release the hostages.
Israel points out Hamas can easily end the war.
If Hamas were to release the hostages and surrender their weapons, not one more shot would need to be fired.
In the U.S. Senate, an effort by progressives to end sales of offensive weapons to Israel went down to a solid defeat. Opponents said it would send the wrong signal.
This signal will be seen by the enemies of Israel and the enemies of peace as if they just stick with it, they will win.
Chris Mitchell, CBN News, Jerusalem.
Thanks, Chris. Gordon, back over to you.
The truth has been turned on its head here, and it is just amazing to me. Again, the history, go back to 2006 when Israel withdrew from Gaza. It was under the Bush administration with the promise that somehow or other there would be an Arab Spring in Gaza. They would realize the benefits of democracy. They would want freedom. They would want prosperity. Well, it turned out they didn't want any of that, and they elected Hamas to lead them. In the very next year, Hamas suspended elections after killing the rival party, Fatah. They took him to the rooftop and threw him over. So you look at this and go, why in the world would the United States ever try to back that? Hezbollah, it's a proxy of Iran. It's fully funded from Iran. All the weapons come from Iran. You look at this, again, in the history, Israel withdrew from southern Lebanon with a promise from the UN that there would be a buffer zone, that no rockets, no weapons, no soldiers would be allowed, and the UN security forces would enforce it. Well, we've seen the video. There are tunnels set up right underneath the watchtower of the UN barracks. It's amazing, the disconnect. And then the International Court to issue arrest warrants. Well, who's the supreme judge of that court? Well, he's a Muslim from Lebanon. Who's the chief prosecutor of that court? Well, he's a Muslim. He's from Britain. His father's from Pakistan. Well, what in the world do you expect to happen? Now, let me call out our own State Department. When you restored funding to Gaza and you restored funding to UNRWA, did you really not know they were supporting Hamas? Did you really not know that the tunnels were right next to the UNRWA headquarters, that the tunnels were right next to the mosques and the schools and the hospitals, that the rockets were right in the building where UNRWA was? Did you not know that? For the funding that's currently going to supposedly the armed forces of Lebanon, do you not know it's being diverted to Hezbollah? Are you exercising willful ignorance in trying to kick the can down the road in some useless hope for peace? I submit to everyone, we're on the verge of a great victory. The proxies in this terror war are about to be defeated. Let's make sure that we do everything in our power to make sure Israel has the weapons it needs, the resolve it needs, the international support it needs in order to finish the job. Because if they can finish the job, then we really can see peace in the Middle East.